What's up guys, it's Brad from Light Architect here. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can create a very simple flamethrower effect inside of Blender 2.83 utilizing the KHAOS add-on and fire shader with mantaflow. This should be a fairly straightforward tutorial and you can apply the concepts learned in it in a lot of different ways inside of simulation, inside of Blender, so I hope you enjoy it. Anyways guys, let's get started. Here we are inside of Blender. Let's go ahead and delete our default cube and everything else in our scene here. And now we'll just go ahead and I'll go ahead and open up the KHAOS tab here. And I'm going to scroll down and we're going to create some barriers with our collision objects here for our flamethrower to interact with. So I'll go ahead and add a collision cube here. And as you've probably seen in some of the other tutorials, all these objects are just basic cubes with collision physics and fluid physics enabled on them so that smoke, fire, and particles will interact with them. So feel free to add any object you want to your scene that you want to interact with your fire, and go ahead and enable those settings inside of the physics tab here if you like. Anyways, I'll go ahead and position our collision cube over here and I'll just scale it on the y-axis here, and we'll just kind of create a wall here. Just something for our flames to blast against, and we'll just kind of create a wall like this and maybe scale it up on the x-axis, and something like this should be pretty cool. And now we'll go ahead and we'll duplicate this collision cube, and now I'll just rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees, and we'll turn this into our floor here. And now we have our basic environment set up here. And now we're just going to create a flamethrower to blast against this wall here. So I'll go ahead and go to our KHAOS tab here again. And we're going to go ahead and select the dynamic smoke fire checkbox. And we're going to use the 360 ground burst operator, but first we're going to adjust a few settings here. We'll go ahead and change the scale particle amount by 100. Just so we have a lot of particles in our scene here. And we'll also scale the emission time by 10. So that we have a longer blast of particles coming from our particle emitter. And then we'll also increase our particle life by 5 maybe, and then we'll bring our start size down to 0.5 and our end size down to 0.5. Since it's going to be more like a fluid being blasted out of the flamethrower, it kind of makes more sense to have more smaller particles. And everything else here looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and choose on our timeline when we want our flamethrower to start. So I'll go ahead and go to frame 20 here, and then I'll go to my 3D cursor and I'll select where we want our flamethrower to be. So I'll just choose a spot over here, and then we'll go ahead and select the 360 ground burst. And now as you can see here, we have our 360 ground burst operator as well as our custom domain cube. But now let's go ahead and adjust these to blast against the wall here. So let's go ahead and select both of them here, and I'll just scale them both up. And I'm just going to put our domain cube just kind of around our general scene here so that we can capture the entire simulation. Something like this, pretty good. This should cover our simulation pretty well, and I might scale it up a little bit, but this should cover our simulation pretty well. And so now let's go ahead and select our 360 ground burst here, and as you can see, if we scroll through our timeline here, we can see what the particles are doing right now. And this would definitely create some kind of fuel blast that would be similar to a flamethrower, but we want to kind of make the particles just go more directional and stay more together. So one of the cool things about the 360 ground burst system here is that we can just scale it up on the z-axis and then scale it down entirely and create kind of a smaller stream of particles blasting out. And you'll notice that there are a few outliers here, so to get a more controlled stream of particles here, we'll just go to the particle settings here under the particle tab, and then we'll go ahead and under the velocity settings we'll change the randomize to something like maybe 4. And now if we play through it, it'll be an even tighter version of particles. And let's go ahead and scale it more up on the z-axis as well. And now we have a nice little stream of particles going on here. And we'll also go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and rotate our 360 ground burst so it's pointing toward our wall here. And I'll just kind of put it like this for now and just see what it's doing. And this could work pretty well, but our particles are dying off before they reach the wall here. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the lifetime of our particles in our particle tab here. So I'll go ahead and make them maybe try something like 36. And that's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and let's move it to the center here. Maybe make it something like 40. We want our particles to kind of bounce off of the wall here to get a little bit of interaction. And maybe even try something like 42. Alright, now we're getting some kind of interaction with the wall here, which is pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and under our particle system, under the viewport display in our particle tab, I'll change the display as to cross. And that just makes it a little bit easier to work with, in my opinion. So you can see where the particles are going individually. I'll also go ahead and decrease the randomize a little bit more to maybe something like 3. Now it's a much more thin stream of particles, which is pretty cool here. And something like this should be pretty good. I'll also go up to the emission settings here, and I'll change the end time of our emission settings to something like 100. And let's see what that does. And now our particles will be blasted out a little bit longer. And I think this should be pretty good. Now let's go ahead and animate our fuel particle emitter here. So we'll go to the beginning of our simulation, maybe around frame 20 when our particles start being blasted out. And I'll go ahead and I'll rotate it down toward the floor here. And I'll press I, add a location rotation scale keyframe. And then we'll play through it a bit here. And maybe around frame 55 we'll rotate it up a little bit. And maybe over to the left a little bit. And then press I again and add another keyframe for location rotation scale. Now let's see what we're getting here. And that's kind of cool. Now let's go ahead and I'll go to frame 85 maybe, 82 maybe, and we'll just rotate it over somewhere over here and then down. Press I again, add another location rotation scale keyframe, and then we'll end it at frame 120, and then we'll kind of just rotate it down toward the bottom again and maybe over more to the right. And then press I again, add another location rotation scale keyframe. And now let's go ahead and play through it here in our timeline. And now if we go ahead and play through it here, we get something like this. It's just kind of spraying fuel particles at our interactive environment here. And I think this will look pretty good. So now let's go ahead and set up our simulation to be baked. I'll go ahead and I might just increase the lifetime of these particles to 44 just to give them a little bit longer of a life to bounce around our scene some more. And now let's go ahead and I'll select our smoke domain cube here. And since our particle system doesn't really have any interaction over here, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll scale this smoke domain down on the y-axis and just kind of put it over here like this. Alright, so now that we've set up our particle system and animated our flamethrower fuel field, let's go ahead and select our flamethrower fuel field here really quick. And I'm just going to go to the particle system tab here one more time, and I'm just going to bake this particle system. And what that's going to do is it's just going to make sure that the particles stay in the same place throughout the entirety of the simulation, and that Blender doesn't have to simulate those particles bouncing around the scene every time we play through it. And after we do that, let's go ahead and set up our smoke domain for baking our original smoke and fire mesh. So let's go ahead and select our smoke domain here, and then we'll go to the physics properties tab here, and this is where we can change all of the different properties of the smoke domain that our simulation is going to follow. So we'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and increase our resolution divisions to something like 232, just so we have a little bit more detail in the original simulation and have a slightly larger scale look. And resolution divisions, as you guys probably know, is just the number of voxels essentially within your domain cube. So essentially how many times this cube is divided up into individual elements. So essentially the higher you put this number, the more detail you're going to have, but it's also going to change the way your smoke interacts in the simulation. So I like to set that a little bit higher for a little bit larger scale look. And then we'll scroll down here to the vorticity. We'll go ahead and put vorticity at 0.02. And that'll just give a little bit of random motion within the smoke, which will be pretty cool. I'll also go ahead and check the dissolve checkbox here, and I'll change the time to something like maybe 22. And that's just going to let the smoke and fire dissolve over 22 frames, so it just doesn't linger in our scene forever. And under the fire settings here, I'm going to decrease our reaction speed to something smaller like 0.18. And that's just going to make sure that our flames linger a little bit longer before they turn into smoke and give a little bit more of that flamethrower look. And I think this is looking pretty cool here. If you have any glitches, be sure to deselect adaptive domain, but I think we have enough particles in the scene for adaptive domain to work pretty well. So I think this is going to be pretty good. I'll go ahead and make sure that your project is saved once again. And then under the cache option here, we need to choose where our smoke simulation data is saved. So I'll go ahead and open up the folder here, and I'll just go ahead and create a new folder for it here under our project folder and call it Flamethrower Cache. and we'll go ahead and select that folder and accept. And now all of your smoke and fire simulation data is going to be saved in that folder. I'll also go ahead and change the end frame of our simulation data to something like 150, just so we have a little bit longer simulation. And also I've already gone ahead and changed the end frame of our project timeline to 150 as well. And yeah, this should be pretty good here. Let's go ahead and save our project one more time. And then I'll just press bake data and then give your computer some time to simulate your original smoke and fire simulation base mesh. Alright guys, so we are back and we have baked the original smoke and fire simulation base mesh, and it's looking pretty cool here. Let's go ahead and play through it in real time using our OpenGL render active viewport option. So to do that, I'll go ahead and first I'll change our output option here to 65%, and then we'll make sure that our frames are the ones we want rendered here, so from frame 1 to 150. And then I'll just go and I'll choose a frame in our viewport here that we want to render out our animation in viewport mode, and then I'll just go to view and viewport render animation. And now Blender is just going to go through in preview mode and analyze all of our frames so we can play it back in real time and get an idea of what our simulation is going to look like once we render it out. Alright, so now that Blender has gone through all of the frames here, we'll go ahead and close the window. And we'll just go to render and view animation, and now as you can see, we can see it playing in real time here in preview mode, and it's looking really awesome. I think the only thing I'm not a big fan of right here is I think the dissolve is a little bit too fast, so I might increase that to maybe 30 or 40 next time. But I think this is going to look pretty cool, so let's go ahead and close our window here. And now let's go to our smoke domain here and select it. We'll go back to the physics panel, and now we're going to bake our high resolution noise on top of our original smoke and fire base mesh. So we'll go ahead and check the noise checkbox here, and depending on how much detail you want to add to your simulation or how close your camera is going to render the simulation, you may want to up-res your simulation a little bit more than 2. I'm going to go ahead and do 3 for this specific example, but I think most of the time if it's a distance simulation, 2 should work pretty well. And I'm going to leave the strength at 1 and the scale at 2, and then the time at 0.1, and this should be pretty good. And now I'll go ahead and I'll save our project one more time, and now I'll just go ahead and press bake noise, and then once again we'll give our computer some time to bake that noise on top of our original smoke and fire simulation. Alright guys, we are back and we have baked the high resolution noise on top of our original simulation, and it's looking really awesome here. We have a lot of really good detail in the smoke and fire, so let's go ahead and add a camera to our scene and set up our environment for rendering. And if we go to rendered mode right now, you can see that we are in EV mode here, which you could actually render out in EV mode, but we're going to be using cycles just so the lighting is a little bit more accurate. So we'll go ahead and go to the camera tab here, and we'll change the render engine to cycles. And then we'll go ahead and change the sampling down to something like, try something like 38. That should be pretty good for this specific example. I usually put the render somewhere around 40, plus or minus a little bit, depending on the quality I'm going for. And under the advanced settings, we'll also go ahead and select the seed stopwatch for some noise variation. And then I'll go down here to light paths, and we'll increase the volume bounces to 5. And that's just so the light bounces around our smoke and fire a little bit more, so it's a little bit more realistic look. And then I'll go here, and under volumes, we'll decrease the step size to 0.05, and then decrease the max steps to 260. And this should be pretty good. I'm also going to make our film transparent so that we can render this flamethrower animation with an alpha channel. And yeah, this should be pretty good. Now let's go ahead and I'll choose a frame here so that we can add a camera and create a good looking frame for it. Let's see, probably we can put the camera on this side. So let's go ahead and press Shift A, and we'll add a camera to our scene. And I'll just place the camera off to the right of our flamethrower here, and we'll go ahead and go to view viewpoint camera so we can view through it. And we'll pull our camera back here a little bit. Alright, this is looking pretty cool here, and I'll go to the camera setting tab here. We'll change the focal length to something like 35, just so it's a little bit wider, and then we'll just come a little bit closer with it. Let's go ahead and go in our timeline near the end of our simulation to see what it's looking like. And we just want to make sure that our entire animation is going to be framed properly here. So this is kind of just a matter of personal taste. And this is looking pretty cool here. I'm going to go ahead and increase the size of our collision objects here because we're going to make these shadow catchers for our render. So I'll go ahead and select both of our collision cubes here, and then I'll just scale them up on the x-axis. And now we can turn these collision cubes into shadow catchers so that we can composite this on a transparent background with shadows more easily. And I'll go ahead and select our first collision cube here, and we'll go to the object properties tab here, and under visibility we'll just make it a shadow catcher by checking this checkbox, and we'll do the same thing to our second collision cube here. And now let's go ahead and add a world to our scene. So I'm going to just go ahead and add a sky texture here, and this is just for some ambient lighting. And finally we'll just add one area light to our scene as well. So we'll go ahead and press Shift A and add a area light, and I think we'll just put this directly above our flamethrower and just give the simulation some kind of top light, something like this, and we'll scale it up to make it a bigger source. And make sure we're positioning it correctly here. I'll just move it over, and then we'll go to the light tab here, and we'll increase the power to something like 10,000. And now we'll go ahead and we'll go to shading mode here, and let's go ahead and click our cycles rendering option here, and I'll go ahead and get out of rendered mode for now, and we'll go ahead and select the smoke domain here, and then we'll go to view viewpoint camera so that we can shade according to our camera's perspective. And now, as you can see here, we have our KHAOS fire shader here, and if we just go to rendered mode here, we can see what we're getting with the default fire shader settings, and then we can adjust those depending on the look we're going for. And I think our default settings are looking pretty good here, but I'm going to play around with the KHAOS fire shader settings here, and then I'll let you guys know what the final settings were that I used for this specific simulation. Alright, so I didn't end up changing the KHAOS fire shading default settings too much here. I put the smoke density at 200, increased the smoke contrast a little bit to 6, then I put the flame brightness at 6 as well, and then I decreased the flame contrast down to 1. And keep in mind that you can adjust these settings depending on the look for the flamethrower that you're going for, but I was going for a little bit of a thicker smoke look, so I decided to go with these settings. And of course you can also change the colors of different parts of your fire with the smoke fire color ramp here as well, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it this fiery orange color here. Alright, so now let's just go ahead and I'll go out of rendered view here, and let's go ahead and do a quick test render to see what we're getting so far. Before we do that, I'm just going to go ahead and go under our layer properties tab here, and under the data for our passes, I'm going to go ahead and select to export an emission pass as well, and that's just going to help us composite the flames a lot better in post-production so that we can have an isolated layer just for those flames so that we can add glow just to that part of the simulation. And go ahead and also go to the compositing tab here, and we'll go ahead and select use nodes, and then we'll go ahead and I'll press Shift A and create an output here for a file output for the emission pass, and we'll go ahead and open up this here and choose where we want to save our emission pass. So I'll just find that folder for our project here. We'll call this flamethrower emission pass, and our beauty pass will be exported through our image to the composite here. So we'll go ahead and go to the output node here and select where we want our beauty pass to be. So go ahead and select this, and we'll find that same folder, create a new folder here. We'll call this flamethrower beauty pass, and accept. And while we're at it, I'll go ahead and change the file format to OpenEXR, and make sure RGBA is selected so that you have an alpha channel. And actually I need to recreate this file output since we're in PNG mode here, so go ahead and delete this. Just try that one more time since we didn't switch to OpenEXR earlier. Find that same folder. Alright, so that should do it, and let's go ahead and go back to layout mode here. And now before we render our animation, I always do a test render of a still frame first. So I'll go ahead and go to the output tab here. We'll increase our resolution % to 100, and then I'll go ahead and go to render and render image, and then we'll give our computer some time to render out this test render. Alright guys, so we are back, and this is our rendered out frame for our simulation, and it's looking pretty cool here. It did take a little bit longer than I expected to render, so I might bring the sampling down a little bit as well as the volume bounces so we're not waiting a day to render out the entire simulation. But I'd say this is looking pretty awesome here. Once we add some glow and glare and compositing, I think it's going to look really good when we add it on top of whatever our background is. And one cool thing you can do here in this render window here is we can switch to view layer, and now we can switch from the combined beauty pass to the emission pass, and we can see what that emission pass is actually exporting. And as you can see here, you can see why it would be useful is that it's just isolating those flames separately so that we can add the glow just to that aspect of the simulation. So I'll go ahead and close this here, and then we'll just go to the compositing tab, and during that render I just did a few little compositing steps to add a little bit of glow to that emission pass and then overlay it on top of the original beauty pass of the simulation. And it's not really perfect, but you kind of get the general idea. We're just exporting the emission pass pass here, and we're putting it through a bunch of nodes to add glare to it and brighten it up, and then we're overlaying it on top of the original beauty pass. And normally I'll do this inside of After Effects. I tend to have a little more experience in that and personally feel like I can tweak a little bit more, but you can definitely do a lot in Blender as well. It just depends on your experience level in different programs. But I'd say this is looking pretty cool, so I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to export the simulation in an animation form. I'll go ahead and go back to layout mode here, and all you have to do, guys, we already did all the setup. You just go to render and you click on render animation, and then your computer would go through all of the frames in your timeline here from frame 1 to 150 and export that in an OpenEXR sequence as I showed you guys how to make before. Then you can composite in whatever software you'd like. You could even import that OpenEXR sequence back into the node compositor inside of Blender, and then you have full control over your simulation in that compositing process. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful. As always, feel free to leave any comments if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. We'd love to know what kind of tutorials you'd like to see next, and we're always looking for your input. I'll see you guys next time.